It is my pleasure to welcome you to Module 2, Human Rights Challenges and Corruption of the e-learning course on anti-corruption and human rights. In this module, you will learn the domino effect of corruption on the full enjoyment of all human rights and on the role of different actors involved in the prevention of corruption. In my view, effectively fighting corruption is very much related to dealing with illicit financial flows. As a member of the Becky panel set up by the AU in 2012 to deal with illicit financial flows from Africa, and more recently, the UN FACTI panel that looked at financial integrity, I have no doubt about the link between corruption and ending it and stemming illicit financial flows. Illicit financial flows are a major problem to this fight against corruption. They undermine development, human rights, and good governance. And they contribute to poverty. They contribute to undermining of protection of the environment. They contribute to inequality and reduced capacity of governments to be effective in delivering of development. The Becky report estimated that illicit financial flows from Africa amounted to about $50 billion per annum, but were growing. And the UNCTAD report in 2020 found that this amount has gone up to almost $90 billion per annum. However, illicit financial flows are a global problem, not only affecting African or developing countries, but affecting every region. And therefore, it is really important in looking at corruption to deal with this issue as well and have a much more holistic approach towards it. Bribery of government officials is a key driver of illicit financial flows. And although it only accounted for 5% of IFS from Africa, it is very much intertwined and contributes to the other two drivers of illicit financial flows, which are commercial and criminal illicit drivers of IFF. So in order to effectively fight corruption, there is a need to have a holistic approach that looks at the issues of financial integrity broadly and system-wide and deals with it at national, regional, and global levels. Overall, it is important to build financial integrity based on transparency and accountability as key core values, and to deal with it in all its different manifestations. The FACTI report, which was launched in February of 2021, this year, proposed that in order to improve financial integrity, there is a need to transform values, to transform policies, and transform institutions at national and international level. The report also identified or highlighted the impacts of illicit financial flows on which corruption is a core aspect. And it found that the scale of resources lost to IFF include 500 to 600 billion a year lost from profit shifting by multinational enterprises, 1.6 trillion or 2.7% of global GDP lost in money laundering by criminals and other actors, and up to 20 to 40 billion dollars per year estimated in bribes received by public officials in developing and transitioning countries. These resources that are lost to illicit financial flows through corruption, commercial drivers, and criminal actions cost a lot in a year of a pandemic in which countries' economies are heavily affected and the ability of countries to deal with the health costs of COVID-19 are severely constrained because of a lack of resources. The FACTI report found that if stemmed, IFFs would greatly lead to ability of countries to deal with those emerging challenges in this new scenario, but also with challenges that existed before. For example, for India, what the country is thought to lose to tax avoidance and evasion could cover the hospital treatments for 55 million low-income patients annually. In Costa Rica, between 2006 and 2015, net outflows of over 44 billion from trade misinvoicing could have paid for regrowth or maintenance of forest cover on over 25 million hectares of land. And in Chad, the annual loss of tax revenues, which are $343 million, if recovered, could be used to build 38,000 classrooms for out-of-school children. So the connection between IFFs, which are driven by corruption and other factors, and the loss of development opportunities, and also the impact on human rights is unquestionable. Finally, I would urge that the recommendations that have been made by the FACTI report be taken seriously by governments in order to deal with financial integrity and ensure transparency and accountability within the global financial system. And that by looking at this from a systematic and all of government approach, the issues relating to corruption or the fight against corruption will be handled much more effectively. The recommendations that the FACTI panel have made include issues around ending information sharing asymmetries in relation to information shared for tax purposes, so that all countries and their tax authorities receive information equally and are able to ensure that taxpayers pay their fair share, taxpayers including multinational corporations. The recommendations also deal with issues around money laundering, requiring international standards, for example, in anti-money laundering policies, and including requiring that all countries create a centralized registry for holding beneficial ownership information on all legal vehicles. This would enable transparency so that governments are able to know who are the beneficial owners of in various transactions, and ensure once again that practices that lead to loss of resources are stemmed. The recommendations also deal with transparency by having private multinational entities publish accounting and financial information on a country-by-country basis. This would help countries to deal with base erosion and profit shifting practices that lead to significant losses from the public revenues. Finally, there are recommendations that are made in the FACTI report that deal with regulation. Regulation of multinational corporations or of businesses, regulation of enablers, because a lot of these practices are supported by actions of lawyers, accountants, auditors, the banking system, which contribute to the ability of corporations and other individuals to avoid paying their fair due and also to engage in extraction of resources unfairly from countries. So the recommendations that the FACTI report has made about enablers and recommendations relating to protection of actors such as civil society and the media who put a spotlight on these sorts of practices are also important. Ultimately, it is important that international cooperation is prioritized, that new rules relating to the fight against corruption, new rules relating to tax fairness are decided in forums in which all countries are able to participate on an equal basis and set rules that support the work of governments in different situations. It is also important for governments to take action at national level and to ensure that there's an all-of-government approach that brings in law enforcement, customs authorities, tax authorities, and others who all have a role to play in ending corruption and broadly in ending illicit financial flows. Thank you. And I invite all of you to have a look at the FACTI report and the recommendations under it.